This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the Greek interpreter interpreted, the Norwood builder built, and the Reigate squires puzzled, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
How many disguises did Sherlock Holmes use? What were the street Arabs? And how did he get information from his underground network?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 406, Matilda Briggs. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
You're not the waltzing Matilda?
Well, that was earlier during dance class, but now I'm the tapping troubadour. I like to keep, a lot of variety in my footsteps.
I didn't know you could play the trouba. That's great.
Well, you haven't been listening. Who was it? Was it it was a French horn. Michael Flanders wants to find the French horn as an ill wind that nobody blows good.
I'll buy it. And my favorite with my instrument comes from a Far Side cartoon from Gary Larson, the accordion.
Yes,
it's a split screen. There's an escalator going up to heaven and one going down to hell. And the angels are welcoming people at the pearly gate saying, "Welcome to heaven, here's your harp." And there's Satan below. "Welcome to hell, here's your accordion." So,
now, why isn't that a bagpipe? That would have been...
it was a tough contest, but both outdoor instruments, I think.
Yes.
Well, we're not here to talk about bagpipes, accordions, trubas, French horns, or anything like that.
I need to tell our listeners that I have observed you close hand playing an accordion that actually, oddly enough, I own but don't play. And you play the accordion very well.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And let's just say the unplayed accordion is probably the most pleasant.
Thank you, boys.
I prefer to leave it. Yeah. Well, we've got one of our travel episodes up now. This is the second episode of the month. And of course, every second episode of the month in season 8 here, we've been concentrating on things related to travel, whether it is rail or sail or horse buggy or what have you. And the last time we were here, I think we looked at fateful voyages. And some of those unfortunate voyages involve ships. So we thought we could follow it up specifically with the Matilda Briggs. Where do we find the mention of Matilda Briggs and why is it relevant? Well, that is just ahead on this episode of Trifles. Meanwhile, don't forget you can check out the show notes at SherlockHolmesPodcast.com or directly in the podcast app you happen to be listening to us on. We're available everywhere you get podcasts, even on your smart speaker. You can turn to your smart speaker and say, "Listen to the latest episode of Sherlock Holmes Trifles," and we will come up. And of course, your support is more than welcome. For as little as $1 a month, you can help us fund the show, put it on, do the research, and all the rest that goes into the production of a fine vintage podcast like this. You just need to go to trifles.substack.com or patreon.com/trifles. Okay, Bert, who is Matilda Briggs and where do we run into her?
Well, Matilda Briggs runs aground in The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire. This passes as a mention, and Holmes says to Watson, "Oh, Matilda Briggs was not the name of a young woman." Well, now, of course, parenthetically, listeners, at some point it must have been the name of a young woman. But to continue, Holmes says this in a reminiscent voice. It was a ship which is associated with the giant rat of Sumatra, a story for which the world is not yet prepared.
All right. We love those stories.
Yes, and Sophia Matilda Briggs was the daughter of Benjamin Briggs. So you see, it was a woman's name. Captain of the Mary Celeste.
We covered the giant rat of Sumatra at some point. I want to say, I think we mentioned them in season 3. In the international series, episode 151, we have Asians and Sherlock Holmes, so Sumatra would have come up there. And then we also had the Unpublished Cases series that we did in season 2. And in episode 55, we covered weird animals. So the giant rat of Sumatra would suffice. But we didn't ever dedicate a single episode to the giant rat. And in some ways, that's odd, because I think this tends to stand out as one of the most notorious of the unpublished cases. But everyone knows about the giant rat of Sumatra, for which the world was not yet prepared. So here's the interesting part. How does this connect between Matilda Briggs and another real-life nautical mystery?
Well, we might start with the real-life nautical mystery. Well, the Mary Celeste was a Canadian-built, American-registered merchant brigantine that was discovered adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean off of the Azores, the Azorean Islands, in December of 1872. And the last entry in her log was dated 10 days earlier than she was found. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7th and was still amply provisioned when found. There was a cargo of alcohol, completely intact. The captain's and the crew's personal belongings were undisturbed, but none of those who had been on board were ever seen or heard from again. Bum, bum, bum.
Now that is a mystery worthy of a story.
Yes.
And let's put ourselves in the time frame here, 1872. So Arthur Conan Doyle would have been an impressionable, 13-year-old at the time.
Right.
Which, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was that age, that's actually about the age I discovered Sherlock Holmes and a number of other adventure stories. So to a mind like young Arthur, and someone who was not only a creative, right, had a creative streak, art in the blood, so to speak. His father was an artist, and who ultimately became a natural storyteller. What a great seed to plant in his young mind at the time.
Yes, exactly right. And 12 years later, that seed bore fruit in the Cornhill magazine, because in January of 1884, Conan Doyle published anonymously a short story in the Cornhill magazine, which was titled J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. And in that story, the vessel's name was spelled Mary Celeste. So not Mary Celeste, but Marie Celeste, Marie. And it was such a good story that many readers thought it was the report of a real event.
Well, and in some ways it was. It was reminiscent of what would happen in later years with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. this confusion of fact and fiction. He did such a great job of telling this story, this true-to-life story, and embellishing it convincingly that people thought it was the actual tale. Now, before we get into the connection between this and the Matilda Briggs and the Sussex Vampire, let's pause to take a look at what some of the explanations were. Again, it's never been solved, but there are a number of proposed explanations about the disappearance of the crew on the Mary Celeste. There were theories of murder and conspiracy, but the evidence that showed up in Gibraltar didn't support that. Some suspected insurance fraud on the part of the ship's owner, because the Mary Celeste had been heavily overinsured. The owner was able to refute these allegations, so no inquiry was instituted by the insurance companies. And another theory posits that the ship's captain and first mate were partners in a conspiracy to share the salvage proceeds. And again, no evidence exists between the friendship of these men other than their working relationship. But the criticism of this theory is that if they had been planning this kind of a scam, well, they probably wouldn't have devised an attention-drawing mystery. So that's another one. And by the way, we are kind of scrolling through the Mary Celeste Wikipedia page here if you'd like to look into any of these explanations yourself. There's natural phenomena that are suggested. They said that there's some extraordinary and alarming circumstance that must have arisen to cause the entire crew to abandon a sound and seaworthy ship. Maybe it was a false sounding because of a malfunction. Maybe the pumps made it seem as if they were rapidly accumulating water. A severe waterspout strike before the abandonment could explain the amount of water in the ship and the ragged state of her rigging and sails. That low barometric pressure generated by the spout could have driven water from the bilges up into the pumps, leading the crew to overestimate the amount of water and believe that she was in danger of sinking. Other explanations include the possible appearance of a displaced iceberg. Well, it was December, but it would have been early in iceberg season. Usually the icebergs cleave when it is closer to spring, but those wayward and drifting icebergs are bad eggs.
Well, there are a variety of explanations. My favorite is that there was an explosion that caused the crew to abandon the ship. And when they got into the lifeboat, they were separated from the ship and they were lost at sea. And it's interesting, in 2006, an experiment was performed on Channel 5 TV by a chemist from the University College of London. A model of the hold was built with paper cartons representing all the barrels, and an explosion was created using butane gas that caused a big blast and a ball of flame, but no fire damage. It was a pressure wave. It was a spectacular wall of flame, but behind it was relatively cool air. No soot was left behind, no burning, no scorching. Something like that could have happened.
Interesting. Fascinating. Well, let's steer the ship back toward the canon here. And before we get there, I wanted to note I have a collection of coins, commemorative coins, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the return of Sherlock Holmes. So these would have come out in, 2003?
I guess so.
That was, yeah. And there's Queen Elizabeth on one side of the coin, and there are, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 coins total. So we've got, one of a profile of Sherlock Holmes on the back, one of Holmes shaking hands with Lestrade beneath the lamppost in the 6 Napoleons. We've got Holmes lighting his pipe with the tongs at the side of the fireplace with the piece of coal. We've got the struggle at the Reichenbach between he and Professor Moriarty. So a number of them, but one of them is the Mary Celeste. The ship, the Mary Celeste. And I always wondered, why was the Mary Celeste included in this coin collection on the back of one of the coins? So, and not that it makes sense in terms of the return of Sherlock Holmes, but we did say that the giant rat of Sumatra, which was associated with the Matilda Briggs, was mentioned in the Sussex Vampire. That's part of the collection from his last bow, I believe. So,
interesting.
But why? How? Aside from Conan Doyle writing the J. Habakkuk Jepson's statement as a ruse or as a cover for the Mary Celeste, where does the Matilda Briggs figure into all of this?
Yeah, where does the Matilda Briggs fit into all of this?
Well, the captain of the Mary Celeste was one Benjamin Briggs.
Right.
And he and his wife and their 2-year-old daughter were on board. And you'll never guess the name of his daughter, Bert.
Sophie.
You're right.
Well, you see, I guessed it.
Keep going.
Sophie dash Matilda.
Yes.
And this, of course, is exactly what happened. Well, this poor girl, Sophie Marie, so distraught at having this hyphenated first name. You know, how is it nobody can decide? Should I be Sophie? Should I be Marie?
Matilda.
Matilda, right. Sophie Matilda. Jumped into the water, and everyone leapt into the lifeboat to save her, and they all disappeared. And that's actually really what happened. But no, you're absolutely right. Sophie Matilda Briggs.
Wow. Well, maybe what it was, maybe everyone on board was just having too good a time because they didn't have hardtack. They just enjoyed some trifles.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
We have not forgotten your successful action in the case of Matilda Briggs. We are, sirs, faithfully yours, Morrison, and Dodd.
Matilda Briggs was a ship associated with the giant rat of Sumatra, a story for which the world is not yet prepared.